So we're all primed and ready to go.
That's right. I don't know if at the discretion of the chair, we'll get started.
Yeah, sounds good.
We had Aaron Sutton on the line for a brief period, but then if you're logged onto the Adobe Connect, you can see where she wrote a little note there in the chat box indicating that she had to step away. I think I just heard somebody else join us.
Yes, this is Wayne Inanoria from UCSF.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the name.
My name is Wayne Inanoria from UCSF.
Okay, thank you very much, Wayne. Wayne is a newly added member of the Model Design Workgroup, so welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Looks like Anna has joined us online. Anna, are you on the phone too? She's typing. No, she's just online. And folks, for the record, Anna is on vacation this week.
Ooh. Get a medal of courage for joining on vacation. I hope this doesn't mean that, Anna, I hope you're not trying to establish some sort of precedent here, Yeah.
so that when I take a vacation this summer, I'll be expected to participate in these meetings. If I am someplace where I can get internet connection, I will fulfill my duties.
Well, my view that's a good reason to take vacation where there is no internet.
And that is our intention.
Yeah, good. Mike, I'm having a little trouble logging on here. I think I'm going to try to get out of our security system here, see if I can log on separately. That'll probably do it, but you should be seeing me in a moment.
Okay.
There we go.
So Wayne, we would very much would welcome your input on this presentation once we get started. I just heard, I think somebody else just joined us on the line. We'll do a roll call here in a few minutes. But most of the folks have seen this presentation. It is a topic that the Model Design Work Group needs to take a swing at, just as the Analytic Methodology Work Group does. There are a lot of these topics that overlap. And this one overlaps more, I think, than any other subject that we've considered while we've been doing these virtual meetings. And so that's why we decided to use pretty much the same presentation. There are a couple of more topics on the agenda here today than what we looked at last week. But the meat of this presentation was put in front of the Analytic Methodology Work Group just last week. and Aaron was briefly on the line. Jim and Bob and Wayne. Is there anyone else on the line whose name I did not call?
This is Jackie Scott.
Hi, Jackie. Glad you could join us.
Thanks.
And I'm seeing exactly the same names on the Adobe Connect. Well, Chris, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think briefly, Mike, I think you're going to take us through the presentation, but welcome to everyone. And for those who don't know, I chair this group. I think I've interacted with most, but not everybody in the past. So our main agenda item for the day is to hear about the ideas for the Delphi exercise that Mike is going to talk through. Mike, I think does it make sense to share a few key themes from the National Advisory Committee meeting as well?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And then I think if we have a little time at the end after this, we may want to talk about at least a couple of the other frameworks that I think have kind of bubbled to the top of the priority list based on the last NAC meeting. One of our charges as a committee is to be thinking about not only how the NHSPI is structured and designed and its purpose and focus, but also how it relates to national frameworks. So if we have time, we may dive into that discussion a little bit. But for the time being, Mike, why don't you take it away and tell us a little bit about what happened at the NAC meeting and the ideas for the Delphi process for weighting.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Washington, D.C. That was the first in-person meeting of the National Advisory Committee. I actually participated virtually. Unfortunately, I have been called to jury duty here in Fayette County, where I live, for the month of June, but was able to listen in to the presentation, and Anna and Lizeth and others took careful notes, and so it was very much a high-level discussion and update to the NAC about what they felt the overall goals and purposes and mission of this index should be. It was a very free-flowing conversation and discussion, and frankly, today what I've been doing is going over the recording as well as the notes to try to integrate that into a more comprehensive narrative that we'll send back out to the NAC. But some of the key themes that I heard were that they were very keen on this Delphi process, very supportive of that. They felt that it is very important to garner the substantive input of not only the subject matter experts in these various areas, but also to widen the circle to include some what I would refer to as non-traditional participants in the area of health preparedness or health security to get their input on this as well. They thought that getting a qualitative or what I referred to a moment ago as a substantive input was essential to augment the statistical analysis that we have done thus far on the various measures within the index. They also had some conversation about the many frameworks that currently exist, that many from which the National Health Security Preparedness Index owes its intellectual genesis, if you will. that I think that it was Bob Burhans who pointed out that many of the existing national frameworks from CDC and FEMA and ASPR were mined, if you will, for not only their specific themes and focuses, but also for particular measures as they work to construct an index that captured the underlying dimensions of national health security preparedness. But at the same time, there are some new and slowly emerging indices that we really are obligated to also examine closely. And chief among those is the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Culture of Health framework and initiative, which has 41 variables or measures organized around 4 broad thematic areas designed to engender this culture of health. Part of the reason that they thought that it was very important that we look at that closely, as well as the ASPR National Health Security Strategy framework, those two were the ones that I think people felt, the NAC members felt deserved the most attention. And so you see them reflected here on the agenda. So we want to, so that's kind of a brief update of the NAC meeting. I apologize for the second bullet under that first area, reading the model design work group. That really should say the analytic methodology work group. Just to give you a brief update about that. As I said here earlier, this particular presentation, many of these slides were presented to that group last week, and so you're seeing it today. We got some good feedback from the members. We've made some adjustments and thinking about how to approach this as a result of that, and so we're eager to hear your feedback as well. Then we want to get into the weighting, and then time allowing, to briefly consider these two big frameworks. So the sort of the high level view, if you will, of our ideas about how to pursue this Delphi is to identify experts and to do online assessment. And there really be 3 iterations or waves of this effort, with the first being designed to get their input and assessment about the individual item measures. Right now, as you know, there are 194 separate variables that go into comprising a state's index score. We want to take that input and put it back out to them in the second wave. More than likely, the same group of people. And as we go through this, you'll kind of see the logic and the thinking about that, to get their input on the subdomains. Which of the 18 subdomains are, how to give us your sense of how important a subdomain is within one of the 6 domains. And then ultimately, probably to a different group, a high-level group of folks to look at the 6 subdomains and to assess their relative importance, their weight, their value with respect to national health security preparedness. And when we think about weighting measures or subdomains or domains, we have to put it into context. We have to think about, well, okay, it's important with respect to what exactly? And so we think that the best approach is probably to frame it within a context of a all hazards approach. One of the things that came out at the NAC meeting is there was this discussion about this idea about the 80-20
rule or the 2080 rule. This idea that, for example, if you have a sales force, it's usually 20% of your salespeople who account for 80% of your sales. Along those same lines, is it possible that if we do 20% of that 20% of the measures, if done right, can put us in a good position for 80% of the hazards if they were to occur. And so with that logic, we're focusing on the all hazards approach.
Mike, could I ask a question now, or would you prefer that I wait?
No, please.
So I clearly get the all hazards approach, and that makes sense. Just from a kind of an elicitation design perspective, the way you're thinking about structuring this for the participants, do you plan to I guess one option would be to assert the all hazards nature of this and basically instruct them to consider all hazards. Another approach would be to try to define that a little bit more proactively. It could be it might be a simple thing like reminding everyone of the current set of national planning scenarios or something like that. So just from an elicitation point of view, which of those were you planning to do, or did you have another option, and maybe a little bit about the thinking behind that?
Well, I think that, Chris, you have forgotten more than I will ever know about this topic. So I think what, the best thing for me to do would be to get your ideas on what you think we should be doing.
I do have a nagging concern in the back of my mind that people may still kind of frame this in terms of their own experience. And so, especially when selecting people for the more general Delphi, it might be really interesting to try to make sure we try to get some people who have worked in a number of community contexts. But I'm wondering if there might be an argument for being proactive about it and say, we want all hazards, but just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page, this is the list of scenarios, and I guess my inclination would be to kind of go with the current national planning scenarios, which I have to confess I haven't looked at in a long time. But I don't say that with a whole lot of confidence, but I think it would be good for someone who has a more of a psychology background than I do to weigh in on that and just kind of think about the virtues of proactively defining it versus sort of just kind of telling people generally and then letting them sort of construct meaning for that themselves.
Right.
Anybody else have any thoughts about that, I guess?
This is Wayne. I have one question that's sort of related to that, is that how is it this expert panel will be identified? Because obviously when we talk about all hazards, someone's going to be speaking about their experience. It's important to kind of know what they do, what their experience has been, if we can get that to some degree. Because it might be really interesting to see how different groups of individuals, based on what they do and what their expertise are, how they actually weight different things. So one question I have is how do you come up with this expert panel? Mm-hmm. And then another one would be like thinking about this all hazards, because I imagine it. I mean, it's a large collection of a lot of things. So Wayne, let me just kind of hop ahead just a little bit here to the index structure. And so to quickly answer your question, I'll be sending an email out probably this week, maybe as early as tomorrow, to the members of this work group and the analytic methodology work group and possibly even the stakeholder engagement work group, to ask members to nominate individuals who would be good participants for this Delphi panel, and that would include self-nomination. I mean, we would, there's a reason why each of you is there more. In fact, there's more than one reason why each of you is part of this work group currently, and so we would hope that each of you would participate. And we want it to be we want it to represent people who have expertise within each of these 6 areas. So, for example, in the domain, the nomenclature used to describe the 6 broad areas within the index, within the domain of health security surveillance, we would submit, there are 34 measures within that particular domain. We would identify people or ask for candidates of individuals who have a deep knowledge about the area or the domain of health security surveillance.
Okay, got it.
Okay. And so part of what I hope to get out of this meeting today, and the reason that I wanted to get this presentation in front of this work group as well, was that we want to make sure that we have good people, we have good participants, we have people who have the kind of expertise that we need to make this kind of an evaluation. Now, for the particular each item measure, and Chris, I love the idea of framing this in the way that you described it. So they would begin with kind of setting the table with a description of what it means for an all-hazard approach, and then a listing of the various planning scenarios that you described, and then they would transition into each of the item measures and in this case, the first measure is, does your state participate in the behavioral risk factor surveillance system? And so this particular measure is, and I'm going to hop ahead here just so that you've got a good kind of internal conceptual map of this. It would be in the epidemiological investigation. Sorry about stumbling over that. And it is there with 10 other measures. There are a total of 11 measures in that subdomain. And so we would ask them to evaluate that particular measure on, and don't take this too literally. I mean, this is just a kind of a version of how this might look. We want to, as I indicated before, put this online. So I don't know exactly how this is going to be constructed, but there would be some scale from a 0 to 10 with half-point increments, where 0 would indicate, this measure really has no correspondence at all with the subdomain listed, to 10, which is this measure has perfect correspondence, and then varying degrees in between there. And then they would move on to the next one, and the next, and the next. So we would gather that input, and as well as some other input. One of the things, well, I guess I mentioned this when the 80-20 rule came up in the NAC meeting. This was something that Glenn has talked about in past meetings, and I think even maybe in our last model design work group meeting, this idea of being able to identify cross-cutting, core, or transcendent measures. There might be measures that are just, so important that they are important and applicable and affect not only the subdomain that they currently exist, but also they might have relevance for other domains. And so, or they're just so important, we want people to have the opportunity to call those out. And then we have an ongoing online, we have the capacity to continuously accept input on candidate measures or new measures. We'd want to take them to that website so that if after going through this, they see, well, these are good, but there's this measure X that I think is critically important and perfectly captures this subdomain, but I didn't see it listed. And so we want to give them the opportunity to give us that input as well. And so Wayne, now I'm here at the point to where, your question on the previous slide, where would these Delphi participants come from? We envision the 6 separate groups, although there could be overlapping membership. That is to say, there's some people who have expertise in many different areas, and so if appropriate, we would want them to participate in those areas for which they have something to offer. And again, as I've walked through this, we would want to get their input with respect to each of the current measures within a domain or subdomain. Any questions? I'll pause here and just open it up. I'll flip to the next slide that shows the.
Michael, this is Bob Burhans. Kind of following up on what Chris said, and I think he made a good point. I also agree that it's important to describe, for the context of the Delphi approach, what all hazards is, and I also agree with Chris. I think using the 16 FEMA national, part of the national preparedness goal, again, aligning with that, what are the actual all hazards that we as a nation need to prepare for? So I think that's all good. I think that makes sense. But I think one of the challenges from a practical standpoint will be when we have an expert panel and they look, for instance, at, let's use health security surveillance. That's kind of where we've been focusing on, at least in our preliminary discussions, as examples. So you get the biological monitoring and laboratory testing. So when they look at the 16 scenarios, there are 2, 3 that very strongly are where pandemic and a biological event where we're having BSL level 3 laboratories, and that capability would be very, very important. Where it might not be very important for an earthquake, it might not be very important for a hurricane or flooding. So how would you ask our subject matter experts to deal with that tangentially important for the remaining 13 scenarios? So what advice would you give a subject matter expert when they were filling out the Delphi scale on how to approach that issue? I think that's going to be an important issue for the group.
Mm-hmm. And what I want to do, Bob, is turn that question right back to you. How would you suggest that we handle that? Or we'll just open it up to the group.
Well, I think it's important that we recognize it as an issue.
Right.
First of all, because I think when you go through these measures in those domains and subdomains, there are some measures that could be very important in certain scenarios and not very important in others. So mm-hmm. I think that we've got a scale of 10. So I would suggest that if it is at least a vital capability in at least one or more of the scenarios, the all hazard definition of all hazard scenarios, that it receive, I would say, a significant score, that it has, more correspondence rather than less correspondence to the subdomain, and ultimately probably to the domain as well. But I would be interested in hearing my other colleagues' opinions on this.
Yeah, Bob, this is Jackie Scott. I'm listening to this, and I apologize, I haven't been on calls recently. I now do EMS and trauma in addition to preparedness, so
Hi, Jackie.
I'm 3 weeks on the job and just like running like a EMS rig, just going from fire to fire and fire. So, but I think the difficulty is just what Bob mentioned, is trying to weight it based on all hazards without having the criteria to go on. And I think you can simply define that if you're using the planning scenarios, that if it pertains to, greater than 50% of the planning scenarios, it should be X or Y. So if you just define that up front, if you don't think it pertains, if it's less than 5 of those, then it's probably shouldn't get as high a score. So I think using those planning scenarios that are already established is the best you can do. Even though each state or jurisdiction talks about their own hazard vulnerability assessment and what's important to them, this is bigger than that. It's global, so we do need to look at all those. But I think you're going to need to really clarify exactly how to score that based on those planning scenarios.
So I think what I'm hearing is, this is wonderful input, and I thank you for that. I think what I'm hearing is that there's at least planning scenarios, but there's a second dimension, and Bob, this is what you mentioned, and that's intensity. That it could only be, I say only lightly, it could only be relevant for a very small number of the planning scenarios, but it is so intensely important that we ought not discount its importance simply because it's only directly applicable to a small number of the planning scenarios. Is that capture the essence of your point, Bob?
Yeah, that's it exactly. That's whenever you lump things together into any taxonomy, there are strengths and weaknesses to doing that, and I think the same is going to be true of this Delphi approach. I agree with the all hazards approach. I don't think we can look at this any other way. But I think it's important to note that there could be certain measures which are vitally important to a capability, but that capability may not be needed to respond to all 16 different types of hazards. And I think it's going to be something which could potentially be difficult in implementing the Delphi approach to make sure that we're addressing both factors. Which ones are important across the board, like that 80% rule, but what are those 20% that may be absolutely critical to a small number of the scenarios?
Right, and so maybe the key is to ensure that the narrative, and we'll iterate on this. I'm eager to get this thing going, but maybe we can do a lot of work online to get some feedback from work group members in between meetings to play with some of the narrative, maybe a paragraph that kind of lays this out and asks the Delphi participants, it just draws attention to it, that there are, that there's more than one dimension here that one ought to be considering. There's the breadth, there's the intensity, but ultimately it's up to the Delphi participant to use their own best judgment and to kind of weigh things on average with respect to an all-hazard approach. And yeah, it's not perfect, but very few methodologies are, and so we have to learn to live with their shortcomings. And as long as we're explicit and we recognize what those are, that's always the best course of action.
This is Chris. If I understand Bob correctly, Bob, I think you were arguing against weighting, or I'm sort of taking these scenarios all on average. When I listened to what you said initially, I thought it was that, well, if something, or maybe this is the intensity point, if something is really important for one scenario, it just deserves a high ranking, period, even if it is only for one scenario. So, which I think is a really good point. Mike, maybe something, if you decide to go that way, then I think that may have implications for the ability of the analysis to discriminate amongst various measures and domains as well. So in other words, if it becomes too easy, as it were, that's not the best choice of words, but if it's too easy for a measure or a domain to score high, then all of them might score high, and it might be hard to kind of get that signal value, that discriminant power out of the analysis. So I guess that's another thing to kind of keep in mind when you make these design decisions about how to frame the questions.
Well, that's a great point, Chris. And the great thing about a Delphi approach is that they're meant to be iterative and to garner input and to see to look at the results. And if we were to and I guess I wouldn't be completely surprised if something like that happened, if the range of values was between 8.5 and 9 with an average of 9.25, then it seems to me that we would probably want to go back and reframe the way that we're doing this in order to get a wider range of values and to enhance and improve the discriminatory power of this approach. So some great input. Any more? Anything else about this part of it?
Mike, Chris again. I may have missed this, or maybe it's coming up. Are you going to talk, or what is the iteration going to look like? When I think about a kind of a classic Delphi, there's a vote, and then you share the aggregate results back with everybody, and then there's some sort of opportunity for discussion. In this case, presumably online discussion. Is that part of the kind of the three-phase? Is it sort of classic Delphi in that regard?
Well, I would say that this is sort of a modified classic Delphi. I mean, we're certainly open to ideas, but the way our thinking is that we would get the input from this first wave, and then we would present those results back to the same Delphi participants and say, okay, this is what you guys told us about the measures. This is how they kind of line up with respect to how important they are to a particular subdomains. Now look at that, and given that, we want you to now think about subdomains, and that would be the second wave. And so going back to the health security surveillance domain, we would ask them to look at those two subdomains, and we would have the results from the item measures presented in some way. I don't know exactly how we would do that, but presented to them. And we would ask them, then you see here listed the two subdomains within that domain, that when thinking about this domain of health security surveillance, what portion of a state's overall preparedness level is attributed to this subdomain or that subdomain. And you can see that there are 3 of the domains that have 2 subdomains, and then there is one that has 3, one that has 4, and that one that has 5. In this particular one, there were only 2. And we could, in doing this online, we can actually constrain the input so that it has to equal 100%. And again, if everybody says 50-50, and there's no discriminatory power, then, I think that to get back to your point, Chris, we put that back out to folks and say, well, is this, and if everybody's, yeah, that's right, then it is what it is. And we move on from there. And then finally, the domains. And here, we'll see how this process proceeds. But what we're thinking about here would be, for example, the National Advisory Committee members. These are high-level folks who have broad perspective on this topic. We would more than likely want to increase the participation beyond the NAC membership, but people, of that ilk and experience and global perspective, and ask them to look at and again, we would present to these people, some of whom may be the very same ones who participated in earlier versions of iterations of the Delphi, to present to them the results thus far. This is what we know. This is what we've heard. Now, given what you know and what you understand and what you bring to the table, tell us, when you think about national health security preparedness, what portion of the state's overall preparedness level is attributable to, and again, here are the 6 domains. And then I have a bullet here, who are the Delphi participants for this assessment. And what I mean by that is not only just this one, but the subdomain, the item measure, the whole thing. And you don't have to, we don't have to spend the remainder of this virtual meeting with people coming up with, you can send those to me via email. And as I said, I want to get a more formal email out to everyone here within the next day or two, soliciting input on this. Any comments? Sound like a reasonable approach?
How will the survey instrument be pilot tested?
Yeah, that's a great question. Is this Wayne? No. Pilot it. I'm not sure what sort of Delphi methodological rules we would be violating by piloting it with the same folks who we would hope to leverage ultimately for input. But I think that, these work groups, you really form the kind of the natural pilot group for us, in my opinion.
Yeah,
And
I agree with Chris's comment about cognitive tests also, in terms of the interpretation of questions.
So in the chat box, Mike. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think one of the cross-cutting themes here is that there is a lot of subtlety, and this is a fairly complex cognitive task that you're asking people to do. Bob's comment, I hadn't even thought about that issue. So there's just a lot of subtlety here. So that's. One other thing, that this may be, kind of getting into stuff that we don't get into, but I think at various times there has been talk about what, well, could we imagine more scenario-specific weights? And, I gather from the emphasis on all hazards that the decision is not to pursue that. Am I correct in reading it that way?
I think for the short term, you are correct. I think that, and this came up at the NAC meeting last week, and I think that we aspire over the, in the future, over the medium to longer term, to refine the index so that we either have user-defined weights that allow a user to incorporate their own particular kinds of risks that they face. Obviously, Kentucky and Louisiana and California share similar hazards, but also are in unique geographic areas that subject them to different kinds of situations and environmental conditions. And so we're not, it's certainly not off the table, Chris. I mean, it's on the list of things to do, but in the short term, we want to pursue this all hazards approach uniformly.
And I think that makes sense. If nothing else, it's, there are always bugs in any process, so better to do something a little bit simpler the first time out of the gate.
Right.
So one other question, I guess not just for you, Mike, but maybe for all of us. One of our main charges as a committee is to think about ways, domains that the index currently doesn't cover, or aspects of national health security that aren't currently covered but should be covered. And so you mentioned that there will be an opportunity for Delphi participants to identify new measures or unmeasured areas or currently unmeasured areas. Is there any thought about eliciting ideas for other domains or subdomains? And I guess the broader question to the group is, how could we think about using the results of this Delphi to inform our work going forward? With a specific emphasis on thinking about ways that the framework may need to be expanded or reshaped one way or the other. Because this is primarily about weighting the measures, and I don't want to hijack this project and make it our own, but I think it's worth stepping back and asking, are there things that we can and should be learning from this, and are there maybe little ways that this thing could be tweaked to maybe make it even more valuable to us given our charge?
I think that's great. I hope that, and I feel, yes, yeah, we had the conversation there about how to get some additional input about measures that were missing. The same thing holds true for subdomains and domains. I'm not sure exactly, and we kind of wait and see what we get, and then decide how to use that, and whether it can be implemented this time or if it needs to be put on a to-do list for future additions.
Well, on that one point, Mike, I guess my understanding is that we are right about issue appeared to be intersectoral collaboration or partnerships, both because that was something where there were some reasonably decent candidate measures, and also because it is a big theme in the both the National Health Security Strategy and the Culture of Health initiative, and so it would be possibly some kind of low-hanging fruit for starting to kind of reach out in the direction of those other two documents. But my understanding is we're talking pretty much entirely about things for the future. Is that correct?
yes, I think that's correct.
And so one of the things that we had pledged to do last time, and frankly, and I'll take responsibility for this, we're not quite as far as I'd hoped we'd be for this meeting, but we do want to be moving towards coming up with a work plan essentially for ourselves so that we can be ahead of the curve and start having some of the discussions that we need to have in the next few months so that we're on track to get new measures ready for next May or June so that they can appear in the next index. So one of the reasons I say that is just to let everybody on the phone know that we haven't forgotten about that, and that in fact we're hoping that this Delphi process can kind of add to our thinking about what that work plan ought to be. So sorry, that was a question that turned into a statement. Pardon me.
Okay, well, if anyone in the work group on the line, if you have other things, ideas that come to mind that you want to share, or if you just simply want to elaborate on something that you've already expressed, please send me an email and let me know.
Thanks for presenting this, Mike. It's very helpful.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks to each of you for your time and attention to this waiting. And so, Chris, at this point, I've got the RWJF Culture of Health slide queued up. If you want to take it from here.
Yeah. First, Mike, just back to, I guess, confirming my understanding of some of the key discussion points at the NAC meeting. So I guess my understanding is that we're not necessarily forgetting entirely about all other frameworks and indices, but that our guidance was that these two, Culture of Health, NHSS, are by far the most important ones. Is that a correct interpretation?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Okay, so I guess maybe we should be thinking about what we need to be doing to what our next step ought to be. We've got 5 minutes here, so we're not going to get a whole lot done. But I guess a question for Mike and the group is: would it make sense to have some sort of a focused discussion on these two frameworks for the next meeting, or what do folks think would be helpful in terms of digging into these two frameworks? I suspect people may be fairly familiar with NHSS because it's been around for a little while, although the latest version hasn't been on the streets that long. Culture of Health is fairly new. So what would people find helpful in getting up to speed on those issues?
So this is Jim Craig. I do think it would be very beneficial to have a little more detail on the Culture of Health framework, especially. I find it a little disheartening that the NAC wanted to set aside a couple of the other frameworks for now, but I understand that you just can't take the elephant on all at one time. The health security piece, while it is probably a little better known, there are some small changes that were made in the latest revision that we probably need to emphasize and make sure that we get addressed in this work as well.
Presentation on the Culture of Health, just get a little deeper other than seeing these four overarching goals and objectives. The other thing I think would be interesting to do and is to take a look at the National Health Security Strategy, particularly to take a look below the strategic objectives and take a look at and actually below each of the priority areas to take a look at some of the activities, priority activities that are defined in the National Health Security Strategy, and then take a look at the existing measures we have in the index and see how many of them map, as if not directly, as a proxy for some of the activities that are specified in the National Health Security Strategy. I think that'd be a very interesting endeavor to undertake, to take a look and see to what degree is how well we have done linking those two, that strategy with our current format, and to see, quite honestly, what's missing, what so-called domains or areas where we're not measuring the National Health Security Strategy Inter-Index. I think that'd be a really interesting activity.
Other thoughts? I think that's a great idea myself, Bob. Others? So Mike, maybe you and I should talk offline about, can we make some progress on at least a first cut of a crosswalk, and also figure out what's the best approach for getting this group a little more immersed in the culture of health. I've been involved in parts of that. I can speak to some parts of it, but we may want to, at the very least, reach back out to RWJ and just get their thoughts on how to share all this stuff.
These all sound like very productive and interesting activities.
Okay, well, I guess if I have the floor, I think it's time to wrap up, and so we will plan on having a discussion of these two other frameworks next time with a goal of getting us all up to speed on it and starting to get a sense of where the NHSPI has measures, where we may have some gaps, and Mike, I guess we should be thinking of that in terms of both the full set of measures in the last version, but also that discussion should reflect whatever the current thinking is about thinning out the number of measures as well, just so we're sort of on top of what that situation is.
Sure.
So why don't you and I talk offline, and I guess for the rest of us, we're adjourned until next time.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for participating.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay. Bye-bye.